Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. As you can hear, I'm a little bit kind of having a cold, so I'm not sure about my voice. I hope it will hold the whole way. So let's see. So I'm very excited to be here. And as Mark told you, I've been involved in ICF research and its implementation in autism and ADHD for a long time now, for 15 years. And I would like to share all my knowledge, experience, and also my research with you in the next 75 minutes. And then we have 15 minutes for discussion, which I'm looking forward to. So here are my disclosures. I think it's important for you to know that I'm CEO in a little company called Neurosupport Solutions. That's mostly because in Sweden, it's the only country where we have something called the teacher's exemption. That means you own your own IP rights of the research that you are generating the results, but it's also your obligation then to see that actually you come somewhere with the research if you want to bring it to practice. So it's on the shoulders of the researcher to make utility out of the research. And that in Sweden you can only do if you have a little company. I think it's very important for you to know because in the end, I will also talk about utility of my ICF research. I'm in Sweden. I'm located at the Karolinska Institutet. I'm heading a center called KIND, and we are about 60 people, either researchers or clinicians or both. And we have been there for 15 years. And if you want to know more about us, please check out our website. Another thing, if you just cannot get enough of the ICF, even after my talk, we have a homepage. It's there not only in Swedish, but also in English, where you can read a lot about our work that we have been doing and that we are currently doing when it comes to the ICF and implementation in autism and ADHD. A little bit more about myself. So I'm a neurotypical researcher and clinical psychologist, and I've been working clinically and research and education in autism and ADHD for 30 years, mostly in academic child and adolescent psychiatry. And I've been working with the ICF for around 15 years and have published 40 scientific articles on the ICF. So I hope that I know what I'm talking about. So what is this talk about? The first thing is I would like to give you just kind of a crash course to the ICF and why I think it's a very important classification at the moment. And I think it can introduce change and maybe a paradigm shift that we need. And also why it's a good timing. I have a long list of the pros and cons of ICF use that I would like to share with you. Then I would like to talk more about the implementation of the ICF in ADHD and autism. That's mostly where I'm coming in and people around the world that have supported that research. And I would then like to finalize with, the operationalization of the ICF into tools that we can really use also in research and in clinical settings, in social support settings, and in education. Would like to start with a little citation. Something is written in the state of Denmark. And it's not only, I think, in Denmark. I guess we have it around the world, or at least in high-income countries, that when we are in the field of autism and ADHD and other neurodevelopmental conditions that we see from a systemic point of view, there's a lot of things that are not really working out. We have a lot of challenges that we have no real solutions for at the moment. Everything from long waiting lists to our target group not being really happy with the services that we are delivering, and many more. So I think it's time that we think about what can we do differently, because when we look at education, we look at social services, we look at society, we have a lot of unsolved challenges, and it does not seem really the case that we have a good plan or a straight vision or a strategy how we should, well, address all these challenges and help people with developmental challenges to get better lives. And why I'm talking today is because I'm deeply convinced that the ICF could be really a way of solving a lot of things, or at least is a good attempt, and I think it fits very many challenges. And I would like to convince you of that today. On the other hand, I think we also need to be patient. It's not the easiest thing, but of course today there are so many things happening in the autism and ADHD sphere. We have it's a society question today. For a long time, it was maybe more perceived as a clinical question, but today it's a society question. That means also we have very many players who have a say and have a role. We have so many different attitudes. We have, which is of course a very good thing, the loud voices of advocacy and people with autism or ADHD who make their voices heard. These are great developments. On the other hand, of course, it makes a lot of noise, and I think people everywhere who work in services today are a little bit unsure about the whole field and where we're going. So to me, that's a sign that we are in a transdisciplinary phase, and I guess we also need to be open that we have a phase where we feel a little bit insecure, and there are many question marks, and we need to be open to change, and we need to think differently, and we need to listen and be ready to change our ways. It's not so easy for professionals to change their ways. It's you need to challenge yourself, and you need to ask yourself questions. It's sometimes inconvenient, but I think we need to be open for change. We cannot try to hold on, to the way that we have been looking at things and working for a very long time. It does not make us very credible. But we need to, well, embrace that there is a phase of change and a phase of insecurity also for us, for ourselves. But I hope, once we have come to new, in citation marks, normal in the area, that we will kind of end in a better place. And I think that I see certain developments that are taking place. At the moment, there are also other wins, not at least from the USA, which make me a little bit doubtful sometimes where we are going, because it's a dominating culture, and maybe not as dominating as it was, but still influential. But still, I think I see that we are going somehow in the area of autism and ADHD, that we are more interested today of support, not so much only about the biological causes, that we also understand that autism and ADHD, these are questions that we need to address from a society point of view. It's not only a biological thing, that we also understand we have to, well, we are looking at a lot of diversity here. It's not only that we are looking kind of at disorders. So we talk about differences, even though they may be kind of prototypes of these conditions. It's something that we need to address from a diversity point of view. We cannot only address autism and ADHD in the clinical setting. We understand, as I said several times now, it's a society thing. So we need to have answers also in education, in the workplace, and in society as a whole. I think we also understand that we cannot just kind of lump together all people with ADHD or autism into one group, but we need to understand, of course, that there's so much heterogeneity and individualism. We need to address each single individual and need to be interested in all the universe of characteristics and strengths and needs that there are. We also understand more and more that it's not about the individual only, but where we can and we need to generate better lives by also addressing the environment. In addition, we also see that we need to value the primary perspective of people who are autistic or who have ADHD. And their families. We need to listen, and we need to value the primary perspective, and to make things work in the long term, we need to take in all the voices and all the attitudes, and we need to co-create things. So we cannot just have an expert or kind of professional view and say we are the ones who know all the solutions, but we need to generate solutions together. I think it's very important that we bring in people with those conditions, but also politicians, professionals, interest organizations, and so forth, so that we really agree on what's a good way forward. Otherwise, we'll not get sustainable solutions to the field. We also need to understand that people are impatient, that we cannot promise solutions in the far future. We need to do things as soon as possible. We need to offer help and support kind of tomorrow and not in the far future. Then I hope also we get more view of that we want to solve problems, not only describe them all of the time, so that we're coming from a pure description of problems, more to solutions and opportunities, and that we use the resilience and strength of people. I think we need to build agency. We need to help people to be strong and be more, that we facilitate that they also get power over their own life and not only try to describe again and again what all the problems are. For that, I think we need to talk more about functioning, what I'm going to do today, quality of life, and that people can achieve their personally meaningful goals, and that we do not talk always about diagnosis and symptoms. I think overly using medical terminology for all kinds of behaviors and emotions and cognitions is something that maybe also sometimes is in the way. And as the co-creation, I also think we have so many players in that field, and then they're not always agreeing on things. To the contrary, often they know best what they cannot do instead of doing things, and maybe also refer to other services and so. And I hope we'll find a way that we can unite forces and get good collaborations, and so that people really get the services that they could get. Well, but let's talk about the challenges first. I think it's important to really be aware what the challenges are. Sometimes things need to be very clear, and you need to be very aware of the situation and go where it really hurts to get the motivation and the clarity to really want to change things. And I guess one reason why we're here today is because there are more and more diagnoses of autism and ADHD made, particularly in high-income countries, but increasingly also in middle-income countries, and it's maybe also in some low-income countries. And this has been ongoing for a long time, for about 20 years now. Countries are, of course, on different levels. Sweden is a country where we have kind of comparably high rates of autism and ADHD diagnosis, more like maybe in the USA. So you can see here, there's a little bit Swedish here in these figures, but I think it's quite easy to understand. So you can see here in the left figure, people with either or kind of autism or ADHD diagnosis in Sweden, where we now have about 10% of all boys being either diagnosed with autism or ADHD, and about 6% with diagnosed either with autism and ADHD among girls. And you can see to the right, these are figures for the separate diagnosis. And often what's often reported the most is because it's the highest, is the rate of either autism or ADHD in adolescent boys, where we, for instance, have in Stockholm about 15% of the adolescent boys being diagnosed with ADHD and about 6% being diagnosed with autism. So these figures are a lot higher than we ever thought, and also they are also beginning to be higher than epidemiological studies were suggesting for a long time. There are many different reasons for why these diagnoses are increasing. I cannot go through them because that would be a separate, actually, a lecture. But I have been writing about this quite extensively. For instance, also in the Conversation, which you maybe are familiar with. It's a good popular science a journal. So you maybe want to have a look at what I'm thinking about why these diagnoses are increasing. We can also see that just the kind of the amount of referrals for autism or ADHD is increasing, and also the time and resources spent on these conditions in child and adolescent mental health services. For instance, here to the left, you can see that's for the region Stockholm, with about 3 million people, that the clients enrolled in child and adolescent psychiatry, when you look here, is about 55% of all referrals for any conditions are now for either autism or ADHD. And to the right is a national statistic, and that's about the time spent by child and adolescent psychiatrists in kind of dealing with referrals for ADHD. And that's at the moment around 70% of all the time or resources of child psychiatrists are going to ADHD. And there is a prediction by the Swedish Board of Health and Welfare where we probably are going to be in terms of diagnosis rates before we maybe see a kind of a plateau. And the prediction is that we are going to be around 15% of all boys being diagnosed and around maybe 11% of all girls until we maybe see kind of a plateauing of the development. Another thing that's also important is the kind of the queues and the waiting time. And this is statistics here from the child and adolescent psychiatry in Stockholm. So that's kind of a public service provider. And you can see here the green line, that's the median waiting time for time to a diagnostic assessment. And that's 7.5 months in Stockholm. But there's also a group, kind of a smaller group, the upper 10% that have been waiting for a long time. So the highest, kind of the 10th percentile, is they have been waiting about 15 months. I know these figures are maybe not in the kind of international setting, not the most alarming, but for instance, for Sweden, of course, where we have also ideas and where you should be kind of guaranteed kind of services within 3 months. These are kind of high figures. And you can also see that the development is still upwards. Then we have other kind of new things popping up, and I understand that this is also something that's happening. I think in the UK, we have a lot of private providers today who make a business model out of assessments and do kind of maybe shady assessments. And maybe in Sweden, we had a case of a provider that did not even kind of see the children that they were kind of diagnosing, and also often promising people that the assessment is going to be positive in the end. So these are kind of strange developments, and we have also providers who try to make use of that there are European regulations for trying to send people who are in Swedish waiting queues to Denmark, and then that they pay themselves, and then they can invoice the Swedish national insurance company for it. So there are also these things that make people thinking about that we are maybe on a wrong track here. We have ourselves, on behalf of the healthcare authorities in Region Stockholm, made just two or 3 years ago a huge assessment of what people think is where we need improvement in the service chain for children and adolescents with autism. And this was a study that we did both with a lot of clinicians and the leaders of the units, a lot of parents and adolescents. And we found out that these different informants are quite consistent in the things that they think we should be improving in the services. Then maybe they have different ideas how to do it, but most of them see quite huge challenges and also think then should be addressed. Everything that the system is very complex, and it's just not large enough for the amount of children and adolescents that are referred. There's a lot of clarity in the services and so forth. So there's consistency among all the people who actually are either working or using services, that we have a lot of space for improvement. Also, when you go to schools, to the education system, we also have a lot of challenges there, and I think this also applies to other countries. So again, sorry for the Swedish, but I walk you through. So this is a survey that is done by Autism Sweden, so the national interest organization, the major one for autism. And you can see that where they ask the members, and that is an organization with about 20,000 members, and they ask parents of the school situation of their children, and it's about 25% when they are in secondary school, they do not the grades to proceed actually to high school. As about 50%, they say we are not happy with the support and the approach that we get in the school. And about 20% have kind of longer times or kind of chronic times of school absenteeism. So even here, not only in the clinical sphere, also in the education sphere, a lot of challenges and space for improvement. Something that is also emerging in Sweden is kind of a group of mostly kind of young adults between 18 and 25. It's a group of people who neither work nor study. And in that group, we see actually a lot of young adults with either autism or ADHD diagnosis. And there's also intersectional aspects of those with an immigrant background and those who have low socioeconomic status. They are also very highly overrepresented in that group. And finally, the kind of the employment situation. Again, it's maybe a little bit better than in other high-income countries, but still, we see that a lot of people with disabilities, including people with autism or ADHD, who want to get their workforce on the kind of on the labor market, but do not really succeed to do so, and there's kind of even a lesser degree of people with ADHD or those who are autistic who do not get an employment or can keep it. So I think that in all of this, somehow our traditional kind of work that we mostly and sometimes even exclusively work formally with diagnosis, that could also play a role in causing some of these challenges. I'm absolutely not against diagnosis, but having been in this field for 30 years and have seen a lot of developments in different kind of arenas, and having been working in child adolescent psychiatry for such a long time, I think there are also limits how feasible diagnoses are to address things that are part of the modern society. So for a very long time, diagnoses have been a very good thing to generate awareness about things, facilitate communication, and they have done things, of course, for documentation, for statistics and research, have been an excellent way to simplify complexity. But on the other hand, well, maybe that complexity is also something that we need to have and need to address and need to be aware of. So maybe just because also the tradition is a classical nosology in the ICD and in the DSM-5. So it maybe fits more things that we really can classify in yes or no, like diseases. But when we come to kind of diversity and when we come to disability, it probably has its limitations, because somehow it has turned out that there is still, even though these diagnoses are less stigmatized today, there is some form of course, stigma. Not at least because we lose a lot of information in that process, and people are de-individualized and more or less suddenly also associated a lot with their diagnosis. It may also be that we understand that we need to address autism and ADHD on a society level, but when a diagnosis is introduced, suddenly still, I guess, there is this idea that something for clinical services to handle. I don't know how often I have heard in many places, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a clinical expert. I cannot do anything when it comes to autistic people or those diagnosed with ADHD. So the simplifications maybe not always that good, and it makes a disclaimer for some people. So I think somehow kind of exclusively working diagnostically is not sufficient for neurodevelopmental conditions, and sometimes in our society it's just too much simplification. And therefore, I'm very much interested in doing something about it and kind of try to value that complexity. And the good thing is WHO, that I think 191 countries have agreed to kind of use and implement the systems that the WHO has developed, also has a system actually to address and value complexity. And that's the ICF, the International Classification of Functioning. So while the ICD or even the DSM-5 are mostly kind of defining a condition, generate criteria and so forth for this defining a condition, the ICF is more or less interested in trying to understand how people are living with a certain condition and trying to address and individualize kind of a gestalt picture of a person. Then there's also in that family, there's the third classification, the ICHI, the International Classification of Health Interventions. And essentially the idea of the WHO is, and as I said, most countries have agreed to this, is use all of these three systems, and that these systems can talk to each other, and we use those not only in healthcare but also in other services whenever it makes sense, and maybe sometimes we have one manual kind of being more relevant, more dominant, more meaningful, maybe sometimes the other, sometimes also they maybe be more important in a certain flow of the service chain. So the important thing would be that we really are aware that there are three manuals, and we should be kind of using those three in the best way possible. And what I'm trying to understand more is how we can best use the ICF. So for those who are not familiar with the ICF, it's a biopsychosocial model, and it integrates both kind of biological parts, psychological part, and social parts. So in the end, it's a model where we try to understand an individual, often with a health-related condition, but not necessarily. Want to look at the person's abilities, not only the disabilities, both. And we want to try to do this from the body functions point of view and the body structures point of view. So that's mostly the biology of things. That's also where there is most overlap with the medical model. But then also to look, okay, what kind of activities is the person kind of doing? In how far is this person doing this in the social context? So how about participation? And then also to inventorize the huge dimensions of environmental factors, both barriers to functioning, but also facilitators of functioning. And the last aspect are the personal factors. So that's everything that is maybe not linked to a certain condition, but still of a high value and very important. That could be, for instance, lifestyle things or spirituality, and sometimes even identity questions and empowerment and so forth. And the idea is all of these different aspects, they're also interacting with each other. And you can address the different parts of the individual and make change. So it's a dynamic model where you can not only address the challenges of a person, but also the person's strength and their environmental barriers and facilitators. The ICF is quite comprehensive. That's important to understand when I talk about later how we have been trying to work with the implementation of the ICF. So it has about 1,675 codes in those different areas. And I think for the area of child adolescent psychiatry, of course, body functions are very important, mental functions, sensory functions, voice and speech, and so forth. But of course, also all of the areas in the activities and participation, like learning and applying knowledge, mobility, self-care, and other things, and all of the environmental factors, like, for instance, attitudes and services in society. The ICF codes, they come on different levels. So kind of normally people would operate in everyday kind of services on the second level. And all kinds of codes are also available on a second level. But sometimes you can also have a more detailed descriptions and do what we call for diving. So when you go from a second level kind of down to more specific descriptions. For instance, when you have mental functions of language as a body function, then you could go on a deeper level where it comes to the reception of language, and then the deepest level would be reception of spoken language. Very important thing is, because I also know that the terminology functioning is not has a kind of a negative connotation, I think, in British English. But in the ICF, it should not be confused with impairment or only impairment. It should not be, it does not have a connotation that it's kind of a loss of productivity of a person, but rather functioning is meant as a construct that's more kind of flexible and more dynamic. And it's rather, it's rather something that emerges based on an individual's abilities and challenges on one hand, and the negative or positive effects of the environment. So it's not the same as impairment, not at all, because it's not looking only at the challenges of individual, but also the strength and the environmental impact, and tries to understand things from a more holistic point of view. There's also kind of an ethical idea behind the ICF where one highly values, the primary perspective of people. The idea is a lot of functioning can only be kind of experienced from a primary point of view, and that there's always, because also we have a model where we have environment and individual, and both the positive and maybe more the challenging side, there's a more kind of positive idea behind. For instance, here's a kind of a list. So where you have to the left kind of a more negativistic idea about people and the situation, and more the alternative understanding that would be kind of more in line with the ICF. So, for instance, you would not say a person does not want to do things, rather say the person cannot yet do it. Or kind of you say, well, someone is lying. No, the ICF would say, well, some is just trying to survive. Or when a person is feeling quite lonely, you try, well, there's always support available. So that you have just a more optimistic view of things, which I guess is also important in our field, where there is so much kind of negativism and sometimes hopelessness and not a good idea about where the field is going. I think the ICF can also introduce some kind of more optimistic thinking. Here's just an example of the integration of the ICF and the ICD. If you go on the ICD kind of homepage, and you look how things are organized in the ICD-11, and you see in the menu all the different kind of diagnosis clusters of the ICD. You see in the end that there is a supplementary section for functioning. And that is actually kind of functioning kind of in terms of the ICF. So most of the instruments that are offered, they are recommended, they are based on the ICF. So for instance, the HODAS or the Brief Model Disability Survey, or a selection of 40 codes from the ICF. Importantly here is just to know that this is mostly focusing on really focusing on impairment, not really operationalizing the ICF fully, because it's here meant to help people who are using the ICD to make an evaluation of the impairment criterion, which is in place for many diagnoses, not at least in the field of child and adolescent mental health. So there is a link, but still the ICF is viewed a little bit one-sided here in the ICD. So I guess you already have understood that I'm thinking the ICF is a good thing, but I would like to add some more arguments. Well, the first thing is, and I guess it's a very important one, that is, it's not a single person who has an idea how we could maybe try to improve things. It's actually the ICF is a classification that is coming from the WHO. So it has an international authority. There are decisions taken by many healthcare authorities internationally, and also nationally. There's an idea in many countries how this could be implemented and put forward. So there are no formal barriers. It's not a single person who tries to get across a brilliant new idea, which is often a very hard thing to do. No, we have here the authority of a worldwide authority and organization. So that can make things a lot easier. The other thing, when you start digging a little bit, you will see in many countries there are already initiatives where the ICF is implemented on a quite large scale. So for instance, if you would look at the diagnostic guidelines for assessment in autism in Australia, you would see that there's a lot of ICF thinking and a lot of ICF recommendation in there. So a lot of the assessments that are recommended are linked or based on the ICF and these guidelines. In Sweden, the Socialstyrelsen, the Social Board of Health and Welfare, is strongly recommending ICF use since 2019 in a lot of different things. So across services for assessment of strengths and needs, for service planning, for generating education plans, for statistics documentation. So it's kind of really put forward by our national authority. In Germany and other countries, if you want to get if you want to get disability compensation, then also this must be based on an ICF description. So it's just to show things are already ongoing. Second, I think very important thing is that the ICF has a lot of space to look at environmental impact. So you can look at, how is the school situation, how is the family situation, what is going on when it comes to accessibility of services, when it comes to attitudes, and so forth. Of course, these are things that we have been thinking about and, of course, working with for a long time, but it's still a difference if you need to look at them, if these get formalized, when you have codes, when it's really also getting the authority backed up by a system and a classification. It also takes into account strength, and I'm not talking about superpowers also. But I think it's very important that we try to get a more balanced view of the autism and ADHD area in general, and of course, particularly when it comes to a single individual. And people always have things they are better at and worse at. That's a given thing, and I think it's not a good development that we only look at the challenges of people for many reasons. We are cultivating a negative view on things. We are kind of making people maybe kind of weaker and than they are. We are not focusing on solution. We are focusing on problems, which I think, at least for me, who have been working in child and psychiatry for 30 years, kind of that's maybe the thing that we are doing the most. We are getting very excellent and very skilled in detecting all of the things that do not work out in people's challenges and all of the problems. We are not equally trained and not equally good in inventorizing the possibilities and the solutions and the things that work out. So of course this makes the view that glass is always, kind of half empty, not half full. And I think we should be getting a lot better in clinical services, in other places, to be better at inventorizing, what's actually working out and trying to work with those things too. And we know there are things on an individual level in autism that we can take advantage of. And these are studies here that I'm showing that come from our ICF research, and they are all in the public domain. So all of the articles I'm showing here, they're all free access. If you go to PubMed and find those articles, you can access those. So we find this in research both in autism but also in ADHD, not only in the perception of the people and their relatives, but also in the perception and in the experience of international experts or professionals in the field. I guess a very important thing is that we also in a situation today where we, on the one hand, formally are working according to a kind of biomedical model, as we are using DSM and ICD in a lot of different ways in research, in clinical sector, for reimbursement and so forth. So we are working according to this. On the other hand, we are getting more and more aware that autism and ADHD in many kind of aspects is rather an expression of diversity. And this is reinforced, not at least by the neurodiversity movement. There's some kind of controversy and the tension in that has its good aspects, but also, of course, also kind of it generates a situation of where we cannot kind of work together in an efficient way. There's a lot of controversy and conflict. And I think the ICF, because it both has a biological model, which is not necessarily biomedical, but it's biological, and it has a social model too. I guess the ICF is a system that can bridge these two models and can reconcile things that actually appear in the first place as something that we cannot bring together. But the ICF both have a biological and a social model, and I think both medical people and also neurodiversity ideas can actually being brought together using the ICF. And something that is happening in Sweden, and I think in other countries too, is we have very different services with different cultures and traditions and terminologies and ways of working. Things are different in the clinical sector, in social services, in education and elsewhere. And the ICF is not necessarily meant as a clinical kind of way of working. It can be equally used in social services and education services. And the idea is that it should be a shared language and way of working. And I think it's a good idea to try to harmonize the ways of working between different services, because a lot of resources and energies and is lost in communication and in doing things the same again and again in different services in different ways. We could save a lot of, I think, resources, and we could be far more efficient if we would maybe try to share a model that we can work with. And when it comes to research, we all know that we have some paradigms that are getting stronger and stronger. For instance, personalized medicine, personalized psychology, personalized education, and so forth. And because the ideas of ICF is to get a really very individual kind of map of functioning and an individualized description of a person, of course, this fits quite well with the idea of personalized services. It's also consistent with positive psychology, and positive psychology, for those who do not know, is not about really being overly optimistic or positive about things, but it's saying, again, like with strengths and challenges, they're also often, kind of a something that works better than other things. There's maybe the best self and the worst self, and you can have good situations and bad situations. And we need to also understand those more positive sides. And if we understand those, we maybe can try to work with those and make more of the positive and taking advantage of it, not only addressing the negative. And this is two different ways of working. As the ICF is looking at environmental facilitators and individual strengths, so it fits quite well also the idea of positive psychology. So then I said, I think we can use the ICF in a neuroaffirmative way. So we can do a lot of things that actually are in line with the assumptions of neurodiversity. It's also in line with something that is popular in the USA, the RDoC, the research domain criteria, which tries to say, well, we need to work a little bit more with functioning areas, more transdisciplinary and transdiagnostically. So maybe we should look more at executive function or social cognition or self-regulation across a lot of conditions, not only look at those conditions. So you see, the ICF fits quite well with more kind of modern ideas of how we should organize research and services. And something, because we're also going towards digitalization, and especially also important for Scandinavia, where we have those large central registries, and take advantage of that. We have person numbers and that we do registers. For instance, if we could also add single kind of codes from the ICF to those medical files, then we would get quite rich information on single individuals, but also on the group and national level. We could have a view of, what are the big barriers in the environment? What are the big facilitators? Where are the strengths and the needs of people to do a lot of different things, to organize services or kind of do things on a national level, kind of for policy making and so forth. So I think there's a lot of value also on a more systemic level. And then something that we have also been doing is we have tried to make suggestions how the ICF can be used in research for data harmonization. As you, for instance, know, for those of you who are working with research, there are kind of many different large data collections in the world. And then later on, when you want to generate big data, then you see it's not so easy to get all this data together because people have used different scales and different instruments and so forth. But the ICF could be actually a system where you could kind of enter quite different instruments and then generate data on a more kind of homogeneous construct. So it is also a way to harmonize data in research settings. Something that I sometimes is getting the question is how far is the Vineland, for instance, or the ABAS or other instruments that are often used in autism to assess functioning? How are they kind of different from the ICF? And I think it's quite easy to answer this. So the Vineland and ABAS and other scales, even though quite valuable, what they are doing, they are really operationalizing mostly impairment. So they're addressing mostly the individual and mostly the needs of an individual. They're not addressing also the strength of an individual, and they're not assessing a lot of things that are actually happening in the environment. So they're mostly, when you think of the ICF in 4 fields, it's just serving kind of one field. So they can be important to help to do a coding in the ICF when it comes to an individual's needs, but they're not so valuable to look at the strength or looking at the environmental impact. So and the question is, when there's so much good about the ICF, why are we not doing it? Well, and the first thing, I guess, is because we have been thinking and working according to kind of a diagnostic and nosological model for probably more than 100 years. So it's very, very deeply implemented in our society, in our thinking, in our ways of working and reimbursement system. It's just very, very strong. And to change things is not so easy, especially also when in many, many parts of society, actually this model is still working quite well. So it's just a very strong tradition, and change is something that is difficult. It's quite human to experience change difficult, and on a systemic level, it's even more complex. Another thing is, and I used to take this wonderful Donald Rumsfeld classification, is, and I don't know how it is today, but often when I go to different places and I'm talking about the ICF, I also recognize that for many people, the ICF is a very new thing. So later on, many people say, well, that seems like a great idea, but I did not know it existed. So we are in this field of the unknown knowns. So many people would think it's a good idea if they would know that actually it is out there and we could use it. Then something that is also, of course, very human, and I think it's natural is, of course, when you come with a new idea, and the idea that seems to be quite comprehensive and maybe also in a way kind of addresses, or in citation marks, threatenings your ways of working and thinking, and maybe also your competence and your routines and so. And of course, it's very natural for human beings to say, ooh, kind of wait a second. So often, of course, you get the reaction, this is too complex, it's not for us. We have no time, it's not possible in practice. So again, this is, of course, something that has to do with that we have been working for a very, very long time, and things are very new, people are not aware, and there are no instruments, etc., etc. Something that I found an extremely valid critique, and that's also where the work comes in, that we have been doing is it is the ICF 1. It's not the ICF 11 or so, or not even the ICF 5. So it is a first attempt. It is it's a consensus machine. People are not aware that it exists. They have not been socialized with it. So it's not so easy to be a friend of the ICF kind of in a practical term. So it is comprehensive and complex. It's not super user-friendly. You might say the ICD or DSM-5 is also not user-friendly, but these are things that we are kind of socialized with. And another problem is also it does not link to diagnosis. It does not link to diagnose because it has another philosophy. It's not a diagnostic manual. But on the other hand, when we have been working with diagnosis for over 100 years, there needs to be, I think, practically, and to make this a success and realistic, there needs to be somehow a link to current diagnostic practice. And to address these things have been something that I've been interested in and trying to work with for 15 years. And I would like to tell you about it. So the first thing to make the ICF a little bit more easier and more practical to work with is that you do something that's called core sets. And core sets that's kind of a short list. It's an extraction of codes that are most relevant for the things that you are working with in your practice or research. So if you, for instance, are mostly working with autism or ADHD, then of course it would be good if you would not need to start, with 1,675 or 85 codes. That could take forever. If you said, okay, I'm starting with code 1 and I go to code 1,685, it could take forever. So it's good if you have a reasonable selection of those codes who are highly relevant for a person that you are meeting. And there's a WHO routine to do so. And that is something that we have been doing both for autism and for ADHD. And it generates both a comprehensive short list with all the different codes that could be important at any age. And then you also have short lists for certain age ranges that so age appropriate selections. So we have been doing this for ADHD together with the WHO and something called the ICF Research Branch. It's an institute that links researchers and developers with the WHO. So what we have been doing is we have done an official ICF core set for ADHD. So this is backed up and supported and confirmed, as you want, authorized by the WHO. Everyone can do core sets, but this is kind of a more formalized and official process. When you do things with WHO, it means you need to include all WHO continents and all of the professions that are involved in that area. So these core sets are based on 4 studies, on a systematic review of functioning, a professional survey with people from all different parts of the world and different professions, a qualitative study with people diagnosed with ADHD and also autism, and relatives, interest organizations, personal assistants, and so forth. And then there is a clinical study where you actually take the ICF to a clinical unit, or could also be a school or workplace where people diagnosed, and then you really use the ICF in practice. And then you take the information that is generated and then you link it to ICF codes. You look, this information, where can I find it in the ICF? And then you take those codes as candidates and you bring them to a consensus conference, and then there's a discussion and voting. And then can you come up with those core sets? So that we have done for ADHD, and we have also done it for autism. And as I said, all of these studies are freely available if you want to read more. This is just a summary of how official these core sets are. So they have been monitored by the WHO. There has been a steering committee. There were kind of international organizations involved, and so forth and so forth. It's quite an effort. Then you have this, you can say empirically derived kind of standard selections. But then you also want to know if they actually work in practice. And so what we did afterwards, we did core set validations. We took those to the workplace, to schools, to the clinic, and other places, and looked, is this a good kind of functioning selection? And we found out, it's quite a good selection. It covers between kind of 90 to 95% of all the issues that maybe pop up and are important both in the individual and the environment in those contexts. But we also found out that there was space for improvement. Not a surprise, maybe, not at least because this is also, it's a vastly changing field. So we have made a revision, and those revisions of those core sets for autism and ADHD, they have been published just 1 or 2 years ago. So they're quite new. And importantly, for practice, it's good to know that, kind of what kind of choice is this? So it means it contains 7% of the codes for autism of all ICF codes, and 6% of all ICF codes are in the ADHD core set. So it means this is just to tell you, it's a huge reduction that we're going from 1,685 to, depending on age and depending on the diagnosis, to far, far less codes. So that's something that makes the ICF more usable. And if you want to read more about how people have used this core set in research, we have written a systematic or kind of a scoping review based on a systematic search that is published in Autism, the journal Autism. There's not only for those who are working kind of more broader in psychiatry or even in other services, they are more than just the autism and ADHD core sets that have been developed with the WHO. So you can see here is a quite comprehensive list, and those that are available for other parts of mental health is depression, sleep disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and as I said, autism and ADHD, just to give you an idea what exists already, but of course far away from all diagnoses. Then you have a selection of those items, but you do not have them, operationalized. You do not have them, kind of usable. It's not a scale or an instrument or a complete assessment. So that is what the next step that we have been doing. We have taken this validated selection of codes, and then we have translated those into items. Sometimes a code is one item, sometimes a code is many items. And then we also have done a lot of test runs, and we have piloted in many different user groups, both in Sweden and Germany and in Australia and in the UK, to also try to make these items as few as possible and as easy to understand as possible, and also being in line with what the target groups kind of understands and how they would like to see things formulated, but still being in line with all the ideas and assumptions of the ICF. So it's implemented now this as an instrument on a platform, the ICF Core Sets platform. Some features of this platform. So it's both a self and an informant rating, and it's really meant for people to rate themselves or being rated by kind of a close kind of relative or caregiver. So there's no professional extra burden involved. It's often the questions that I get. There's not a lot of work for a professional, and the answer is no. But of course, the professional needs to make sense of the results and need to take them forward. There's an assessment for autism, ADHD, or kind of combined. They are age-appropriate ones for 0 to 5, 6 to 16, and 17 and older. There's all from 141 items for 0 to 5 in ADHD to 233 in autism plus ADHD in adults. There's a lot of options also to add text, just in case you under each item and after each section. So you can put text in there, and we are working on to implement an AI that can summarize this extra information. It takes everything from 30 minutes to 2 hours to complete. You can make different stops on the way if you want to. You get reminders, and you can always kind of restart where you ended. It generates a CSV file, and it also generates in real time an individual summary of strengths and challenges and environmental barriers and facilitators. And we have done some feasibility studies of the platform, both in the UK and in Sweden, and seems to work out quite well. So what we're doing at the moment is we are trying to standardize the platform. So for making it really usable in practice in different arenas, you will need to have norms. You will need to know also, what is this functioning aspect in relation to the population or other people with those conditions. So at the moment, we are standardizing this platform in Sweden, and we are at the moment we have 16,000 people who have responded to the assessment. We would need probably at least 20,000 to make it really valuable to get all of the different cells, that we have high enough and to have a good comparator. This is what the platform kind of looked like. For instance, these are examples for body function items, for instance, for attention or for perception. So an attention item could be, I can concentrate for as long as needed. And then we have a scaling here that goes from 0 to 10, where the more kind of violet part is kind of more in the area of the weakness. Then there's a blue part that's kind of, as you would kind of perceived, good enough. And you have a green part that's, where you indicate this is a strength that you have. And as you can see, there's always space also for making comments, because some items we need to have them on a quite generic level. And there's often a need for people also to add, to specify things.
5-minute notifications, Sven.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. And these are examples here for participation and the environment. For instance, you have to the left, you have conversation as a participation functions. To the right, you have supporting relationships, and this is kind of an environmental factor, so you can code them both kind of positively from 0 to 5 in a positive way as being a facilitator, and you can go to the left when it's something that you experience as a hinder in your everyday life. This is how the body functions. This is how the summary looks like. So once you are done with your scoring, either your professional or you yourself can get the summary. Currently, in the study that we are running, everyone who is participating, in real time gets this summary. So you get kind of the top 5 and the low 5 if you want, for your body functions in terms of strength and needs. You get the same for activities and participation. And you also get it for the facilitating and the challenging factors in your environment. We have been doing an evaluation of this summary and asked 360 roundabout parents of children and adolescents with either autism, ADHD, or both, what they think of this summary. And we found out that around about 90% of the parents thought that this was a really kind of a good description of the child's strengths and needs. That it was also kind of quite adequate to describe the children's barriers and facilitators. About half said, it again raised their awareness of the child's need and strengths and facilitators. Around 90% said, this really helped me to use the strength of my child and also to address the challenges. And between 40 and 60% said this is something that should be done in clinical or educational or social services. And these are parents who have children who have been diagnosed for quite a long time. So hopefully this could even have a larger effect, just as an assessment in parents and their relatives and children who are kind of maybe in the waiting line or in the queue, or maybe not kind of more naive to the area than these parents. What we are currently doing is we are trying to connect such a strength and needs assessment to kind of an intervention guide, also using AI. So we are about to generate kind of an information bank for functioning. We are generating information bank for self-help related to those functions. And we are generating an info bank, about the evidence that there is to addressing these challenges or to develop strength in that area, so that you can actually have kind of one flow. You can make the assessment, you get your summary, and then you can specifically self-guided or guided by a professional say, well, these are your strengths, and here's more information. This you can do yourself. Here's help available, and so forth. It's a lot happening in the UK. So both the NHS is interested in this work and working more with the ICF. We're also working together with Autistica, and in Sheffield, Professor Megan Frith is also testing out this platform and the ICF. So there's a lot happening in the NHS, and I'm very happy that this is happening. Well, there are many potential applications of the ICF. I guess you understand that. So we can do this. We can do ICF thing, pre-diagnostically, within the diagnostic process, or post-diagnostically. It must not only happen in the clinical field. It can happen also, kind of in schools, outside of the clinical sector. We can use it for kind of coaching, for self-help. We can use it across professions. I think it can also help policymakers in decision making. It's not only for the public sector, can also be something that insurance companies are interested of, in the industry. And of course, it's something that I think is useful for research and development, and could generate a lot of valuable data. I stop here, and I think I'm right on time. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Sven. Thank you so much for running exactly to time. It makes my job as a chair far easier. We now have some questions from the audience. Hopefully we'll get through as many of them as possible in the next 15 minutes. But we have, probably more questions than we have time for. So the first question is, like in Sweden, in the UK, there are very long National Health Service waiting lists for autism and ADHD. Often these are into multiple years, owing to public demands outstripping capacity. It's very likely these will worsen further with the introduction of ICD-11, with the lowering of thresholds compared to ICD-10 for some of the conditions that we are diagnosing. If public assessment systems had to ration what was offered assessment-wise, do you think that the ICF could be a useful tool in triaging those for assessment with greater needs? But also, do you have any thoughts regarding the impact of this approach on those who are functioning well but could function better, such as those where a diagnosis and treatment may make a difference between getting onto a chosen degree or career path or not?
Look, that was a long question.
It was a very long one. I'm sorry.
I think no worries. But I just that I have all the parts that I need to respond to. So the first thing is, my hope is that we can implement the ICF broader than just in clinical services. So I hope, I know it's not easy, but I hope we could really come into this more kind of prevention area, so that we actually, for instance, in Sweden, we work a lot with school health teams, maybe using the ICF, kind of far earlier than kind of when it comes to a clinical setting. So my hope is we could bring this out to many places kind of before the clinic. But I think that was not the question. The question was if we can triage. The ICF is not really meant for it. So I guess you get the flavor. The idea is to get the final aim of the ICF is always to increase the social participation of people. So the idea is always to use a personalized profile for a process. It's a process assessment. So you should always afterwards use it to formulate individual goals and so. So that said, it's not really meant for triaging. But I also understand, and I get this question quite often, that people say, well, I have a situation here and I would like to know, can the ICF help me with my situation? And then it often comes to the question of functioning level and to functioning needs. And as you say, this question of triage, can it help? And then I say two things. The first thing, I think yes. When we have good kind of research, when we have good norms, and that's also why we are kind of collecting these norms. So if we have really large norms, then I think it can be used for having a more qualitative idea what kind of profile is more serious and less serious. Then, of course, there needs to be some weighting by a clinician in the background. And what we would then need, that's why we're also doing a kind of a little bit larger assessment than only doing norms. We are also investigating how functioning is related to a lot of social demographic factors and also to quality of life and mental health. So we need to find out which profiles actually prognostically are correlated with which outcomes. So if we know that, I guess it can.
Okay, thank you. And there is, this is, I guess, a sort of an involvement in future research question. There is an NHS trust. So trusts in the UK are basically hospital networks. And they're undergoing a transformation in their model for autism and ADHD. And they are just beginning on a journey, it would appear, and they are thinking about the ICF and also maybe the ICHI. But they are wondering if there would be example or opportunities for a service provider in England to apply to join a supported pilot phase within the research.
Well, I think so, and I think the easiest way is then to connect to my partners in the UK who know the system better, who probably have done similar things. So I'm very happy to connect.
Okay, excellent. Now, there's a question about barriers. So even with the advantage of the ICF framework, many systems still rely heavily on categorical diagnoses. What do you see as the greatest barriers, whether those are institutional, cultural, or practical, to moving from a diagnosis focus to a more holistic participation focus approach in autism and ADHD?
Well, I think it's it's two things, these very, very strong traditions that we have in using kind of a medical model. We cannot underestimate how strong that is. And I meet so many clinicians also who have principally that they think it's very important. We need to work with functioning maps, and we need to think otherwise. But when it really comes to kind of changing daily routine, because people are kind of trying to deal with a very challenging situation, and they often do not see the time to work strategically, and with a real change in parallel. So it is. I think a lot of people are in this situation that they do not think they have the time and space to kind of rebuild something from scratch because they're dealing with a very challenging situation. I think that that's some kind of it, and people cannot see. They do not have really kind of a mantra how this would look like in the future. So that's a little bit why we are trying also to, I did not show this in the end, but we are trying to generate very, very, very specific products also from the ICF. For instance, we are working with the ADHD stimulant medication titration app based on the ICF, and we are working with an AI that can, based on that ICF scoring, generate you a patient report so that you come in with concrete products based on the ICF that help people, in their everyday work to generate more space, and to take the burden away. And I think that's maybe a way to come in. And then maybe people want to have more and more actually, ICF-based kind of tools.
Excellent. So there are a couple of questions that relate to the future. I'm going to try and merge them across my screens here. So one is about, what do you think are the key principles or ideas from the ICF to move people in the short term, sort of moving those principles into practice? But then a second question is more about, what do you think are the most promising opportunities for collaboration between professionals, neurodivergent individuals and their families to make the ICF truly transformative in practice in the future? So they're both future related. One short term and one is more probably longer term.
Yeah. So longer term, I think the most important thing is to find kind of new ways of kind of working together. And I've over the summer I've written an ERC grant, an advanced grant to the European Union, where this is a work package trying to bring together kind of people who are diagnosed, their relatives, all the different service providers, interest organizations, to find out, kind of what actually people could be doing together with the ICF. I think it's a very complex thing. And maybe there is a kind of one could reach some kind of consensus around this. I guess we can start with two providers. For instance, I would think in Sweden would be great if we could have agreements between child psychiatry and schools. If we could get that together, or maybe child psychiatry and adult psychiatry agreements, how just between two providers may be easier than the whole. And then I must say, after all, I think there needs to be an economic incentive associated with doing ICF-based ICF-based things. Then things will start to move, I guess, unfortunately.
Okay. So next question is, where do you think the ICF sits on the spectrum of the medical model of disability versus a socially constructed model?
As I tried to say, of course, somehow the ICF it comes from the disability sector. So of course it has a certain disability and also, a clinical flavor to it. But I'm always, and I understand that people, kind of who really are identifying with the neurodiversity movement think, it's not really feeling, perfect. But kind of my thing is really, I think it's the absolutely most likely scale to actually bridge things that are somehow between the medical and the neurodiversity model. So I think I just like it so much because I think here's something that actually has a likelihood to be done, and because it has the social model in it, and it's huge. And we can also see in the core sets that's the largest part of the core sets. I think that there's a possibility that both people who have been working traditionally and those who really want a system change somehow can meet halfway.
Okay, can I ask you, the core sets, you mentioned earlier in the talk that anybody can create their own sort of unofficial core set, but the official list, is that an expanding list over time? Do we know if there are ones which are in development that haven't been published yet?
Well, I mean, you could, there are many kind of core sets out there who have been developed by certain people, for instance, and you would probably also find kind of publications. For instance, people say, I do my core set for school, I do my core set for the workplace. We have, for instance, generated now a little core sets for the workplace. It's not completely validated. It's rather kind of based on personal experience and taken together with employers and people, neurodivergent people who are working. So I mean, there are a lot of these things out there, and some of them are also published. But I think these official ones that I showed the list, they're the most credible ones. It's quite difficult to have this comprehensive kind of data-driven approach. Others are just kind of driven by I don't know, kind of practical experience.
Okay. Now we've got a sort of question about terminology used here, which as a clinician, but also a member of a neurodiverse family, it is really quite difficult, I think, to get the terminology right for all audiences, particularly with diagnostic terminology versus preferred terminology, and individuals might have their own preferred ones. So, I mean, the question here is about, what are your views about the language used, particularly around autism, but also that, you work for an organization with the Center of Neurodevelopmental Disorders in its title. So, all of your talk has been related to not using disorder within it, but obviously it's sat on your backdrop behind you.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to the center, this name was given 15 years ago by someone else. We have been thinking about actually, kind of renaming it, and I think it probably would be kind of neurodiversity, because I'm a lot for neurodiversity, because I think that's a very uniting thing. I'm not so much for actually neurodivergence, because I also not know what neuroconvergence is. I mean, I guess the idea is, about diversity. Then I think when you talk about clinical settings, and we work, have been working for a long time with a certain terminology, and there are things that sometimes need to be used, and so it is very complicated. I'm very open to all kinds of terminology. I think it's not the most important thing, but I know it is important for very, very many people, and also sets the tone. But I'm getting more and more, unsure what is what is a good, and also a functioning terminology for everyone. I'm open. I'm absolutely not. I'm not a language police. I do not know anymore. And I think it must be okay that in clinical settings you also use a certain terminology. I think the most important thing is you know whom you are talking to, and that you try to have as much as respect for terminology other people are preferring. Then it's of course very difficult, for instance, in such a audience where I don't know, where there is probably many different people with many different preferences, and I think there is not one preference, so it's hard.
Thank you. That very much chimes with my own thoughts. I've written on this topic, and it is very, very difficult to get it right for everybody, and it's difficult to get it right for myself as well. I get stuck in linguistic tongue twisters at times when I'm presenting, and it then becomes quite difficult to sometimes know what words to use at an exact time. But thank you for your insights. We now have a break for the next 15 minutes, and we'll restart at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.